Have you ever wondered why someone who claimed to care about you, someone who smiled at you, or maybe even loved you, did things that left you confused, small, or quietly hurting? Why would a person choose to control instead of connect? Why use silence instead of words, pressure instead of understanding, guilt instead of grace? It's tempting to believe manipulation is reserved for cruel people, the narcissists, the abusers, the villains in books. But in reality, manipulation often wears a very ordinary face. A kind voice. A warm embrace. A loved one who says, "I'm only doing this because I care." But here's what few people talk about. Most manipulation doesn't begin with malice. It begins with fear. Unspoken, buried fear. The fear of losing control. The fear of not being good enough. The fear of being abandoned, unseen, rejected, just like they once were. You see, control is often a trauma response in disguise. For some people, the only way they know how to feel safe is by subtly managing others, their thoughts, their feelings, their behavior. Because if they can control you, then they won't be blindsided. They won't be left. They won't feel powerless again. That's where the hunger for validation enters. It's not always about dominance. Sometimes it's about survival. They need to feel important, needed, special, unthreatened. And if that means shaping your behavior through guilt, or twisting your perception through gaslighting, if it means giving you affection only when you obey, and withholding it when you don't, they'll do it. Not because they're strong, but because, deep down, they feel so small. Now, this doesn't excuse what they do. It doesn't make it okay. But it does help you understand the truth. Manipulation is a defense mechanism, not just an act of cruelty. Even the people who seem gentle, charismatic, or spiritual can use dark psychological tactics, especially when they've never learned how to regulate their emotions, express their needs clearly, or tolerate vulnerability. People don't become manipulators overnight. They often become that way slowly, silently, forged in environments where vulnerability was unsafe and control was the only language they knew. Maybe they were once children who had to walk on eggshells around their parents. Or teenagers who were rewarded only for performance, not authenticity. Maybe they were never taught how to ask for love, only how to earn it by shaping themselves into what others wanted. And so they shape you. They shape situations. They shape truth itself, to feel in control. The tragedy is, they often don't realize they're doing it. Because when a person has never faced their pain, they project it. And you, the empathic one, the peacekeeper, the sensitive soul, you absorb it. You bend to accommodate it. You try to heal it, without ever realizing what's really happening. But understanding this isn't about pitying the manipulator. It's about freeing you from the lie that you were weak for being affected, or that you're somehow to blame for being drawn into it. This video isn't just about manipulation. It's about the silent tricks people use to control you, not by force, but by slowly reshaping the way you see yourself, the way you trust your mind, the way you give away your peace, one invisible thread at a time. Today, I want to break that silence. To walk with you into the quiet corners of human nature where control hides. Not to make you paranoid, but to wake you up. To give you back the clarity that was taken from you in small, imperceptible ways. And maybe, just maybe, to remind you that you've always been enough, long before someone made you question it. 1. Gaslighting, the war on your inner truth. Sometimes the most painful thing isn't being hurt. It's being told that the hurt never happened. Gaslighting is not just a lie. It's a campaign. A slow, persistent erosion of your inner world, your memory, your instincts, your reality. At first, it seems subtle. You might bring up something that bothered you, a comment, a tone, a behavior, and hear. That never happened. You're too sensitive. You always overreact. They say it with such certainty that you start to doubt yourself. You walk away thinking, maybe I did misunderstand. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I'm the problem. That's how it begins, not with rage, but with quiet dismissal. And over time, something begins to shift inside you. You stop trusting your gut. You question your memories. You second-guess your feelings. And worst of all, you start editing yourself before you even speak, just to avoid the confusion, the confrontation, the cold smile that says, "You're crazy." Gaslighting isn't just manipulation. It's psychological warfare. Not waged on your body, but on your truth. In a relationship, it might sound like, "You're remembering it wrong. You always twist my words. You have no idea what you're talking about." In a family, it might echo through years of denial. "We never treated you that way. You had a great childhood. Why would you say such a thing about your own parents?" In the workplace, it can be just as toxic. A boss who criticizes you in private, then denies it publicly. A colleague who subtly undermines you, then says, "You're imagining things." And the longer you're in it, the more you stop fighting to be understood, and start trying to understand them. To keep the peace, to stay connected, to survive. But what does it cost you? It costs you your voice, your clarity, your compass. It creates a quiet terror in your chest. A constant scanning of every word, every reaction, every facial expression, wondering if you're about to be told, once again, that your reality isn't real. This isn't just emotional discomfort. It's trauma. Because when someone consistently rewrites your reality, you begin to feel unmoored. Like a ship without anchor, drifting in someone else's tide. And what's most heartbreaking? People who've been gaslighted often don't get angry at the person who did it. They get angry at themselves. For not seeing it sooner. For not leaving. For staying silent. But let me say this clearly. There is no shame in being vulnerable to gaslighting. Because it preys on something deeply human, the desire to be loved, to be safe, to be believed. You weren't naive. You were emotionally open. And someone used that openness as a doorway to invade your truth. But here's what they didn't destroy. Your capacity to know what's real. It may feel buried. It may feel faint. But your inner voice, the one they tried to silence, is still there. And with gentleness, with time, with validation, it can be heard again. Healing from gaslighting isn't about convincing them you were right. It's about reclaiming your right to feel, to remember, and to trust yourself again. You are not crazy. You were being twisted. And now you are untwisting. Not into who you were, but into someone who can finally say, "This happened. I saw it. I felt it. And I believe myself." 2. Love bombing and withdrawal, emotional bait and switch. There's a kind of manipulation that feels like magic at first. It doesn't look like control. It doesn't feel like harm. In fact, it feels like the thing you've always longed for. Finally, someone sees you. They praise you, adore you, drown you in attention, touch, compliments. They mirror your values. They say things like, "I've never felt this way before. You're everything I've been looking for. I can't believe we found each other." And you, maybe for the first time in a long time, let your guard down. You let yourself believe, this is real. This is safe. But then, it changes. Almost overnight, the warmth disappears. The texts slow down. The affection fades. The excitement in their voice goes quiet. And the silence sets in like fog, heavy, cold, confusing. You don't know what you did wrong. So you rewind the tape in your head, every word, every moment. Was I too much? Too emotional? Too needy? Not enough? And just as the anxiety begins to drown you, they return. With a smile. With reassurance. With just enough sweetness to keep you hooked. And the cycle begins again. This isn't love. It's not connection. It's a pattern, designed not to build intimacy, but dependency. What you're experiencing is emotional bait and switch. A dark psychological trick called love bombing and withdrawal. Here's what's really happening beneath the surface. When someone love bombs you, they overwhelm you with affection to disarm you, to bypass your boundaries, your discernment, your sense of pace. It creates a rush, chemically, emotionally, spiritually. And that rush becomes a craving. But when that love is pulled away, when the silence replaces the sweetness, when they become cold or distant or indifferent, that craving turns into panic. Because we are wired as humans to attach, to connect, to search for love when it disappears, especially when we've tasted its sweetness. So you try harder. You blame yourself. You cling. And they gain control, not through violence or cruelty, but through unpredictability. This is why it works so well. Because the same person who creates the wound also becomes the only one who can soothe it. That's what makes it so hard to leave. So hard to name. So hard to trust yourself. Because every time they withdraw, your body remembers the high. And you believe, if I can just do better, I'll get that version of them back. But the truth is brutal and liberating. That version of them may have never been real. It was a mask. A performance. Not love, but leverage. And still, the pain feels real. Because your feelings were real. Your vulnerability was real. Your hope was real. So it hurts. It aches in your chest, in your stomach, in your spirit. That ache isn't weakness. It's evidence that you opened your heart. And someone used that openness not to meet you, but to manipulate you. But hear this gently. You are not hard to love. You are not too much. You are not unstable for feeling hurt by instability. You were placed on a roller coaster and told it was romance. Love doesn't move like that. Love doesn't vanish when you need it most. It doesn't punish, confuse, or toy with your nervous system. True love isn't a performance. It's a presence, steady, safe, and real. So if you've been stuck in this cycle, it's not because you're broken. It's because someone taught you to mistake intensity for intimacy, and absence for proof that you need to try harder. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You just need to be safe. And you will be, when you start choosing connection that doesn't cost your peace. 3. Guilt tripping, weaponizing your kindness. There's a particular kind of manipulation that doesn't shout. It sighs. It doesn't accuse. It implies. And somehow, it still makes you feel like you've done something wrong. Even when all you did was try to breathe, to rest, to draw a line that honored your soul. This is the quiet trap of guilt tripping. It's not always loud. Sometimes, it's just a wounded look when you say no. A passive-aggressive comment when you set a boundary. A cold silence after you choose yourself for once. And suddenly, your chest tightens. You feel selfish. Ungrateful. Like you've failed someone who only wanted the best for you. But here's the painful truth. Guilt tripping is not about love. It's about control. And the currency it trades in is your kindness. Because manipulators, whether they know it or not, see something in you. They see your empathy. Your desire to do right. Your longing to be fair, to be caring, to be good. And they use it to make you bend. To make you feel responsible for their emotions. To keep you afraid of disappointing them, even when you're drowning in your own unmet needs. This is where guilt becomes a weapon. Not because you've done something harmful, but because they know you'll believe you did. And that's what makes it so hard to detect. Because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like your fault. But let's go deeper. Guilt is not just a reaction. It's a learned emotional reflex, rooted in childhood. Many of us grew up learning, if I upset people, I lose love. If I say no, I'm bad. If I speak up, I'm selfish. So we learn to people please, to self-abandon, to over-apologize. Not because we're weak, but because we were taught that love is conditional. So when someone says, I guess I just don't matter to you, after everything I've done for you, wow, you've really changed. What they're really doing is pressing on that old wound. The one that says, be good, or be alone. And even if you know it's unfair, even if you sense it's manipulative, you still feel guilty. But here's something no one ever told you. Guilt is not always proof of wrongdoing. Sometimes, guilt is just your nervous system reacting to an old story. A story that says love must be earned through sacrifice. That being good means being small. That your worth is tied to how little you ask for and how much you tolerate. But you can rewrite that story. You can learn to pause when guilt arises and ask, is this guilt, or is this growth? Is this guilt, or is this manipulation? Is this guilt, or is this me finally honoring myself for the first time? Because guilt, when misused by others, can keep you locked in a prison made of your own compassion. But guilt, when examined with care, can also become a doorway. A mirror showing you what matters to you. That you care about fairness. That you don't want to hurt people. That you long for connection that's mutual, not one-sided. That is not weakness. That is your strength. And no one, no matter how subtle, no matter how close, has the right to use your empathy as a leash. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to disappoint someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own emotions. You are allowed to be free. Silent treatment and withholding, the cold power play. Sometimes the deepest wounds come not from what was said, but from what was withheld. Not from screaming or name-calling, but from a cold, calculated silence. It's a kind of cruelty that hides behind nothing. No words. No contact. No explanation. Just a quiet vanishing that leaves you suspended in emotional air. Confused, panicked, disoriented. This is not distance. It's emotional starvation. A power play dressed as withdrawal. And for someone sensitive, someone deeply relational, silence doesn't just hurt. It feels like death. Because we are wired to seek connection. As children, silence from a caregiver meant danger, emotional abandonment, the threat of losing love, or being exiled for simply needing too much. So when someone uses the silent treatment against you as an adult, whether it's a partner, a parent, a friend, a boss, what they're really doing is pressing on that ancient wound. And you feel it in your body. The racing heart. The urge to fix things. The spiral of self-blame. What did I say? Are they angry? Should I apologize? Did I do something wrong? But here's the devastating truth. The silent treatment isn't always about conflict resolution. It's about control. It says, you don't get access to me unless you behave. You don't get answers unless you submit. You don't get love unless you earn it. And in that quiet, a cruel message is delivered. Your needs don't matter. Your voice doesn't deserve a reply. You are being punished, not for who you are, but for how you feel. And it works. Because it doesn't look like abuse. It looks like withdrawal. But emotionally, it's a disappearing act that leaves you gasping for validation. Especially if you grew up in a home where love was conditional. Where love was offered then yanked away. Where your emotions were too big, too inconvenient, too much. That old fear gets reactivated. I must fix this or I'll be abandoned. I must shrink to be loved. I must walk on eggshells to keep them close. And so you chase. You apologize for things you didn't do. You silence yourself just to make them speak again. You try to earn the connection that should have never been withheld in the first place. But here's the most important thing to understand. This isn't love. It's coercion. A cold dance of dominance designed to make you question your worth. True intimacy doesn't punish with silence. It stays. It communicates. It says, I'm hurt, but I'm here. Withholding is not emotional maturity. It's emotional manipulation. And it can leave scars that words never could, because the absence itself becomes the weapon. But if this has happened to you, or is happening now, I want you to hear something clearly. You are not needy for wanting connection. You are not dramatic for needing clarity. You are not wrong for being hurt by silence. What you're feeling is valid. Because connection is a basic human need, not a luxury you have to beg for. And healing starts here. By no longer seeing their silence as your failure. By no longer believing that love should feel like emotional exile. By remembering that the right people don't disappear to punish you, they stay to understand you. 5. Triangulation, keeping you off balance through comparison. There's a certain kind of manipulation that doesn't confront you directly. It circles around you. It creates unease, not through argument, but through comparison. It stirs jealousy, insecurity, and quiet desperation. And you're left asking yourself, why do I suddenly feel like I'm not enough? This is the subtle, destabilizing tactic known as triangulation. It works like this. Instead of speaking to you directly, the manipulator brings in someone else, a third person. Maybe it's an ex they mention too often, a sibling they constantly praise, a coworker they trust just a little more than you, a friend whose opinion somehow always outweighs yours. At first, it might seem harmless, even flattering, in a twisted way, like they're letting you into their world. But slowly you notice the shift. You feel the need to compete, to prove your value, to earn their affection. Because now, it feels like love has conditions. Like attention is a prize to be won, not something shared freely, but something you could lose. And that's the point. Triangulation isn't about connection. It's about control, using comparison as a weapon to keep you off balance, insecure, and striving. When you're triangulated, you begin to believe that affection is scarce. That if you're not perfect, more attractive, more available, more agreeable, you'll be replaced. That love is a competition, and you're losing. This doesn't just happen in romantic relationships. In families, triangulation can be woven into the fabric of your upbringing. A parent who praises one child as the smart one, and you as the difficult one, or who shares your private struggles with another sibling to make a point, not to offer support. In the workplace, it shows up in toxic leadership. A manager who says, "Well, Sam never has a problem with deadlines," or who shares your performance feedback with a colleague, not to encourage growth, but to undermine your confidence. In every context, the message is the same. You're not doing enough. Someone else is better. You should try harder to please me. And the effect? You lose your center. You start performing instead of showing up authentically. You crave approval instead of feeling worthy. You silence your discomfort because you fear being replaced by someone who's more compliant. And worst of all, you stop seeing the manipulation for what it is. Because you're too busy trying to win back love that should have never been conditional. But let's be honest. This tactic works because you care. Because you're sensitive. Because you want to be chosen, not out of desperation, but out of that deep human longing we all carry. To matter. To be safe. To be valued just as we are. The tragedy of triangulation is that it trains you to mistrust others, and eventually, yourself. You start asking, am I being too sensitive? Did I overreact? Maybe they're right, maybe I'm the problem. But here's the truth no manipulator wants you to know. Real love doesn't compare. It connects. Real leadership doesn't undermine. It nurtures. Real family doesn't turn you against each other. It builds bridges, not hierarchies. If someone is making you feel like you're in constant competition for their time, their praise, their loyalty, that's not love. That's emotional scarcity being used to keep you small. And you don't have to keep shrinking to be seen. Your worth is not dependent on being chosen over someone else. You deserve to be chosen without comparison. You deserve love that doesn't dangle, but grounds. 6. Passive aggression and backhanded compliments, the polite poison. Not all manipulation is loud. Not all harm looks like harm. Sometimes, it's a smile that cuts. A compliment that stings. A joke that doesn't feel like a joke. You leave the conversation smiling on the outside, but aching on the inside. Confused. Unsure. Wounded in a way that's hard to explain, even to yourself. This is the subtle art of passive aggression, a form of emotional control hidden inside the appearance of politeness. It sounds like, "Wow, you actually look good today. I guess not everyone needs to work full-time to feel fulfilled. It's amazing how you're not worried about what people think." And the words alone? Harmless, maybe. But the tone, the timing, the tension underneath? It's unmistakable. There's a sting hidden in the sugar. These moments create emotional dissonance. You can't quite name what's wrong, so you question yourself instead of the person delivering it. This is what makes passive aggression so psychologically destabilizing. It plants doubt. It distorts trust. It fills the space between you with unspoken tension. And over time, it teaches you to scan every conversation, to brace yourself for the next jab wrapped in charm, to perform politeness in return, while quietly burying your truth. But why do people do this? Passive aggression is often the weapon of those who fear direct conflict, but still crave control. They don't feel safe expressing anger openly, so they release it sideways, masked as sarcasm, subtle digs, or helpful advice. And in doing so, they create confusion, not clarity. Dominance, not dialogue. The result? You feel emotionally foggy. Like you're always one step behind. Like you're overreacting for being hurt by something so small. But pain is never too small to matter. If you walk away from an interaction questioning your worth, feeling unsettled, tight in your chest, but unable to explain why, pay attention. That's often the signature of passive aggression: harm without admission, hostility without responsibility. But here's what's most important. You do not have to prove your pain to make it valid. If something hurts, it hurts. You're allowed to trust that. You don't need to make excuses for people who consistently speak to you in ways that make you shrink. True respect doesn't mock you behind smiles. True safety doesn't leave you second-guessing your gut. You deserve communication that's clean. Not clever. Not coded. Just clear. 7. Victimhood as a mask. The inverted predator. Some of the most skilled manipulators don't look powerful. They look hurt. They present themselves not as aggressors, but as victims. And this, perhaps, is one of the most disorienting and dangerous forms of psychological control. When someone weaponizes their pain to avoid accountability and make you feel like the abuser, this is not the same as someone genuinely struggling. We all suffer. We all carry trauma, disappointment, wounds. But what we're talking about here is something different. It's when a person uses their suffering, real or exaggerated, as a shield. So that no matter what they do, no matter how they manipulate, accuse, or distort, you can't call it out. Because if you do, you're attacking someone who's already hurting. You become the villain. They become the helpless one. And in that role reversal, truth collapses. This is the inverted predator, someone who gains emotional dominance by always appearing as the wrong party. They say things like, "I can't believe you bring this up right now. Don't you see how much I'm already going through? I guess I'm just always the bad guy, huh? Everyone always abandons me, and now you're doing it too." Suddenly, your needs are cruelty. Your boundaries are betrayal. Your honesty is violence. And you shrink. Not because you're weak, but because your compassion is being used against you. You begin to absorb their emotions. You silence your own truth to protect theirs. You keep the peace at the cost of your own clarity. And the damage runs deep. Because it doesn't just distort what is happening. It distorts who you are. You begin to question your morality. Am I cold? Am I selfish? Am I harming someone who's already broken? But here's the uncomfortable truth. Suffering does not excuse manipulation. And pain is not a free pass to harm others without consequence. This isn't about blaming people for being hurt. It's about recognizing when that hurt is turned outward, used to distort reality, and avoid truth. There is a philosophy here, a moral distortion worth seeing. When someone constantly plays the victim to escape responsibility, they are not seeking healing. They are seeking immunity. Immunity from reflection. Immunity from change. Immunity from being held accountable for the harm they cause while claiming to be the harmed. But love, real love, does not live in that place. Because love doesn't demand you silence yourself to preserve someone else's illusion. You can have empathy and boundaries, compassion and discernment, understanding and accountability. You are allowed to walk away from people who twist pain into power. you are allowed to say, "I believe you've been hurt, but that does not give you the right to hurt me." And when you reclaim that truth, you step out of the spell. You come back to reality. And you realize, you were never cruel. You were just finally telling the truth in a room that preferred silence. When someone controls you in quiet, subtle ways, they don't just manipulate your choices. They slowly unravel your sense of self. At first, it's hard to see. You think you're being understanding. You rationalize their behavior, explain away your discomfort. But over time, you begin to disappear. Your confidence fades. You second-guess yourself. You stop speaking up, stop trusting your own gut. This is the deeper damage of manipulation. Not just what it does to your life, but what it does to your spirit. You start to believe your needs are too much, that your feelings are wrong, that love must always come at the cost of silence. And yet, healing doesn't begin with dramatic change. It begins with one quiet, courageous act. Naming the truth. Saying to yourself, that wasn't love. That wasn't care. That was control. And then, letting go of the shame. Because you weren't foolish. You were hopeful. You weren't weak. You were loyal to the wrong person. What they used against you was not your flaw. It was your kindness. And now, as you begin to come home to yourself, your clarity, your voice, your right to take up space, you may feel shaky. That's okay. Because becoming yourself again isn't a sudden awakening. It's a gentle remembering. A return to the truth that was always inside you. You're not broken. You're rebuilding. And that is sacred. If you've made it this far, there's a part of you that's already waking up. Not to anger, not to war, but to clarity. Because healing from dark psychological manipulation isn't about fighting back. It's about coming home to yourself. It's realizing you were never broken for being kind. You were never weak for wanting connection. You were simply human, and someone used that against you. But the story doesn't end there. You don't have to stay trapped in their version of who you are. You don't have to keep shrinking yourself to keep others comfortable. You don't have to explain your boundaries like they're offenses. You are allowed to trust your perception. You are allowed to speak your truth. You are allowed to take up space, even if your voice shakes. Reclaiming your inner authority doesn't mean becoming hardened. It means becoming whole. It's saying, I believe myself now. I don't need permission to exist as I am. I can love others without losing myself in the process. This kind of healing is quiet. It doesn't always look brave from the outside. But inside, it is a revolution. One boundary. One honest word. One self-trusting breath at a time. So if no one told you yet today, I'm proud of you. Not because you're perfect, but because you've survived manipulation with your heart still beating. Because you're learning to walk back toward your truth, after being pulled so far away from it. You don't need to be louder. Just more you. And that is enough.